What's up, everybody? Welcome. My name is Terrence Hawkins. My pronouns are he, him, and we are glad to have you here with us for the 8th episode of the People's Report. Go ahead and do us a favor and hit that share button so folk can hop in and take part in this important conversation. Before we go any further, I'm going to just let my comrades introduce themselves. I'll start again by saying my name is Terrence, representing the Drum Majors Alliance. Glad to be a part of FC Park. Whoever wants to jump in next.
Hey y'all! Hopefully my face is familiar at this point, but actually hopefully not too, right? I'm Brittany, repping Triad Abolition Project and Forsyth County Police Accountability and Reallocation Coalition.
I can go next. Hey, what's up, y'all? My name is Mage. I use they, them, he, sib, homie, fam pronouns, and I'm also with Triad Abolition Project.
What's up, everyone? My name is Reverend Kenneth Pettigrew, and I am here representing the Drum Majors Alliance. Happy to be here.
Felicia, introduce yourself, love.
Hey everyone, my name's Felicia Arriaga. I am with FC Park, and I most of the time am representing the North Carolina Statewide Police Accountability Network, and it's great to be here with y'all today. I use she, her, aya pronouns.
Cool. Once again, we're glad you all are gathered with us online, and we want to move into some grounding and healing work. And I think we all believe this is so important in light of all this transpired over the last 2 weeks or so, all this transpired since the last People's Report episode. Many of us have been re-traumatized. We've felt overwhelming grief. We've mourned, and I personally, and I'm sure all my comrades here, I reject that binary that says don't mourn, organize, or that we seek liberation or healing. We see those things as wedded together in our struggle, and so I'm going to pass it to Mage at this time, and they are going to lead us in some healing and grounding work.
Awesome. Thank you, Terrence. So I would just invite folks to find a position that is comfortable for you, whether that be grounding your feet into the floor, whether that be sitting crisscross applesauce in your chair, whether that just be laying in your bed with the screen off, whatever you feel is comfortable to y'all. Now I invite you to take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Deep breath in and a deep breath out. Take a moment to just build an awareness about what's moving within you. Bodily awareness is super key to understanding where we hold tension, where we hold grief, where we hold anger, compassion, love, healing, frustration. Take a moment to take in and to reconnect with our bodies. Because in a world that is constantly trying to disconnect us, dismember us, pull us apart, not just community-wise, but from the sinews of our bodies and the bones in our spirits, we reconnect as a form of resilience in a world that is constantly trying to break us apart. Deep breath in, deep breath out. Know that you are loved, worthy, and valued in this space. Ashe.
Ashe, thank you so much for that. We're gonna jump right into this important discussion. As I alluded to in the intro, a whole lot has happened in the last 10, 14 days. We've witnessed the Chauvin trial, the officer who murdered George Floyd just around this time last year. In the middle of that trial, we saw and heard news of Adam Toledo, who was murdered by police in Chicago with his hands up. We then had the just ridiculous reminder, tragic reminder that the trial was about an individual and not a system, when we got word that just 10 miles, I believe it was 10 minutes or so from the place where the Chauvin trial was taking place, Dante Wright was gunned down by the police. Then we get this guilty verdict, and in the very same moment, a young 16-year-old Black girl, Bryant, was gunned down by police as well. And so we, as we said earlier, we grieve all of this, and we also do the work of educating ourselves, wrestling with what all this means, and hopefully figuring out collectively what then must be done. And so I'm going to dive straight into our first question. So I want us to talk about what it looks like for people committed to the practice of abolition to interpret and respond to this guilty verdict in the Chauvin trial. I think it goes without saying that we are committed to an ethic of love and compassion that holds space for a multiplicity of emotions in moments like these, especially as it relates to the family most directly impacted by this. Still, that doesn't mean that we discard our politics and our principles. An abolitionist by the name of Candace Simpson posted on Facebook earlier this week. She said, separating true, valid, and real feelings from organized principles and discerning which feelings make for good principles is difficult. It is difficult. But this is what community is for, holding each other's hearts so that we can discern how to move, end quote. And so my question is twofold. One, how should we interpret this verdict? Was it an expression of justice, or was it, as some have called it, accountability? And then the second question is, what kinds of responses have you seen that have troubled you? And how might we respond to those responses and point people to embrace the principles that get us to freedom versus just continuing the logics of the carceral state? So I can reframe that question again if it was too much, but whoever wants to jump in and take a first stab at it, go right on ahead.
I mean, so at this point, some of y'all, maybe many of y'all, have heard me say this in other places or seen me post this in other places, that the verdict was neither justice nor accountability. Derek Chauvin being found guilty on those 3 charges and eventually going to be sentenced, likely to some prison time, is a carceral punishment. It's a consequence. It's not accountability. To date, no one has taken account for George Floyd's murder, right? There's been no remorse from Derek Chauvin. There's been no reparations. There's been no transformation of the conditions that allowed George Floyd to be murdered in the first place. No one in the Minneapolis Police Department has had to take account for why a member of their police force who had 17 complaints for excessive force against him was still allowed not only to be patrolling, but also to be training other officers. The day he murdered George Floyd, he was training someone else, right? And so no one has taken account for that yet. And so it made a lot of people feel good to say, oh, it wasn't justice, it's accountability, because we thought that was more progressive understanding of the criminal legal system. And it was actually the language that was offered by the AG, Keith Ellison, right? And then it just like dropped on social media like, oh yeah, it wasn't justice, it was accountability. But nobody has taken account for murdering George Floyd. And if reparations are paid to his family in the lawsuit, they don't come from the people that murdered him, they come from the citizens. That comes from tax dollars, right? That comes from the people of Minneapolis pocketbook, not the police chief pocketbook, not Derek Chauvin's pocketbook, not the other 3 officers who were on the scene. And so that's really important for us to just hold on to. And just the last thing I'll say is that the criminal legal system cannot offer us justice for people who have been murdered, right? In any way, right? In any method of murder, there's no justice for that, because someone is, the life is still lost, right? The only way that we can pursue, and that's what we understand as abolitionists, the only way to pursue justice is to transform conditions so that we do not have to continuously have these conversations and have people mourning their loved ones.
Thank you for that. Anybody else want to chime in on the first part of that question before we probe a little bit deeper?
I'll add some thought to that. One thing that I've been sitting with for a long time when it comes to the language of justice and accountability, particularly when thinking about systems, particularly like something that we call a justice system, which often gives us injustice much more often than it gives us justice, right? Is that a system that seeks accountability cannot hold itself accountable. So the language of accountability sounds good. Just like has already been said, the language of accountability sounds good. It sounds much more progressive. It sounds enlightened to say that he was held accountable, or that some kind of accountability is now in place. But here's the thing, though. We can't fall into the trap of what accountability sounds like, because in a lot of different spaces in our world, we have often tried to, we have been seeking accountability, and it is something that just kind of like runs through the fingers like sand, right? Something you try to hold on to, and it just morphs, it just goes. You can't hold on to it. And this idea, sits well with us because we have to navigate a lot of things that are built in binaries. Things are good, things are bad, things are black, things are white, things are, this and that. And so when we have to navigate binaries, particularly around good, bad, around justice versus injustice, we have no concept of what actually either exists in the middle, if there's anything on the spectrum between them, or what exists for them. And I think that that's one of the things that that abolitionist work is going to be imperative in articulating in this season in particular, is the fact that what we are looking for exists without or outside of the conversation of what's good, what's bad, justice versus injustice, accountability, or someone not being held accountable. Because the conditions that have been created to where we have to even look at those things in those particular kinds of ways actually have to be done away with in order for us to get some real clear understanding on what it means to live in a society or to be amongst siblings and people, and exist in a way to where we are not having to, yes, have this conversation over and over again, but also not really having to deal with the trauma and the anxiety that comes along with having dealt with this, and people sitting with bated breath waiting for a verdict from a system that can't hold itself accountable. But for some reason, it made us feel better, and then for some of us it made us feel worse, and for some of us completely unaffected. And that's exactly why, because we spend all of our time in binaries and not thinking about what is without the binaries.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that you touched on the feelings. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, and what you said earlier, Terrence, about sort of in at least the way I heard it, was good police, bad police. And I think in this scenario that it also serves as a distraction, right? That this particular verdict is going to do something to do what all of us as abolitionists are thinking about, right? Which is this chipping away? Is this reducing, right, that overall impact? Is it changing the conditions? And I think when we have these cases, right, and I'm thinking about some of the materials from critical resistance, that they often sort of think about this as actually these big media cases tend to increase more resources to the police, right? Because then the answer becomes this other thing, right? Like technology, body cameras, which obviously I think we're going to dig into a bit today, what that means for like North Carolina and some of the specifics here too. But I think it means, exactly like you're saying, Kenneth, that we sort of have these binaries set up, and if we don't think about sort of like the context and sort of the in between, then we get into these sort of debates of like, well, this is good and this is bad. This is what sort of the verdict allows us to do. And I think that that's challenging for us while we're also trying to, right, respect the wishes of community members who are calling for this, especially if their loved ones are the ones who have been impacted by it, right? But I think that all of that comes back to this question of like, how are we in community, right? So I think it's always still our job to really think through how are we reaching folks to bring that context, right? That much needed context of understanding that goes beyond whether or not this one particular verdict is going to shift any of the things, which I think most of us on this Zoom recognize that it's not going to, unfortunately, shift drastically unless there is the movement work and the community work that goes that continues to push on what sort of it has already been taking place as well.
No doubt, no doubt. You know, I think probably all of us have been disheartened, maybe the word, perhaps even bewildered by some of the responses to the verdict that just demonstrate how deep the logics of the carceral state flow in our thinking and our emotions. And so I want to, you know, get y'all to maybe name some of these responses that we would probably see as problematic, even though we do hold space and at least compassion to why they emerge and why people say what they say, while also trying to push deeper. But what are some of the responses you've seen that just reflect the carceral logic and really do not lead us to being free, but just reinforce the very thing we're trying to get out of? What kind of things have y'all seen, and how does an abolitionist perspective practice call us, I'm going to say higher, call us to something more healing, more life-centered?
Yeah, I mean, I have been horrified, right, to see some of the things that people are cheering that may potentially happen to Derek Chauvin when he's in prison, right? And I'm gonna, you know, content warning right now for some of the things I'm about to mention that I've seen people talk about. But people have been joking about him being raped in prison, about him being sexually assaulted, about him being brutalized, beaten, right? And Terrence, as you were alluding to, the logic that would make that a joke is the same logic that white supremacists use to justify doing that to Black and brown people when they're incarcerated. Because what we're saying is, if we do not like someone, if we do not like someone's actions, they deserve to be raped, right? And that is antithetical to anything that we would hold to be true about how to be in humanity with other people, right? We can really abhor what Derek Chauvin is about, who he is as an individual, and still hold space for his humanity, right? And still hold space for the humanity of people who do really horrific things, and say, we are not going to reinforce the violence, the carceral violence that happens in prisons, because we know anytime we justify that behavior, that trauma, right? It's never going to happen worse to another group. It's always going to come back worse on us, right? As they say, the stuff flows downhill, right? So if we justify it and say this is acceptable, or this is even, we can celebrate this happening to a white police officer, we can be certain that worse is going to be happening to our Black and brown siblings if and when they're incarcerated. And so that's scary to me, that it was so easy for people to make that switch and be like, oh yeah, like prison sexual assault is cool. What? How? Like how? Right? And I think it's important that you're pointing to, like, it is important for us to hold space, right? Because we are traumatized, right? And we are tired of seeing white police brutalize us, right? We are tired of seeing white police murder us. And so people have a lot of really hectic emotions. And we're also socialized that vengeance is justice, right? That punitive punishment is just, right? An eye for an eye type of thing, right? But we know that Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, one of our abolitionist architects that we follow, reminds us it's punishment that leads people to the conclusion in the first instance that the way you deal with a problem is by killing it. So the idea that we have to have punitive carceral punishments is what would then justify them shooting a Black man in the street because he's a problem and we don't have to deal with problems, right?
Yeah. So true. So true. I was thinking back to the what I call the coup d'état, when the folks stormed the Capitol building. And it was weird to see Black folks, brown folks, and other marginalized and oppressed communities begin to call for the FBI and the CIA and the master's tools to be used on the master's children. And what I kept trying to say is, like, yeah, we might think them tools gonna fall on the master children. At the end of the day, it's gonna fall on the stepkids of Empire. The stuff they build, as Brittany was just saying, ultimately is gonna fall on us. So it tactically, whether or not you even understand, whether or not you're down with the ethics, and I would encourage everyone to embrace the ethics. Tactically, that's an unsound position to take. Does anybody else want to jump in around these problematic responses and how abolition can provide another way to look at these things and to move?
Mm-hmm. Something that I just wanted to add is just that I can imagine that folks are listening to abolitionists, or folks who are striving for an abolitionist future, and hearing the things that we're saying. And I can imagine folks being like super enraged, right, by what we're saying, in the sense that they're feeling like we are invalidating their feelings, right? And so we want to make sure that we're really careful in teasing out what it means to validate feelings, right? And acknowledge that the rage that you feel is valid, the anger that you feel is valid, the frustration that you feel is valid, right? While also acknowledging that those spaces and feelings, the feelings are valid. The stories that compel those feelings might not always be the best way of moving and shifting towards liberation work, right? The stories that come with those feelings might have certain perceptions that skew those stories and influence those feelings, right? And so learning and figuring out how we validate and understand the rage that folks feel that are valid, right? And being able to name, like, dang, I want, like, this is the rage that I feel. Like, we're lacking the ability to name feelings that are coming up in our bodies. And so we avoid actually being able to confront our feelings by putting it somewhere else. That is what projection is. That is what violence is. It is the projection of things that we feel like we don't feel equipped to hold, or feel like that we don't have access to because of oppression. And so encouraging folks to actually name and articulate their feelings, and figuring out how to place them somewhere in ways that are productive for them, in ways that don't destroy their spirit, because rage, after extenuated period of time, will destroy the spirit, right? It's something that we need to be able to problematize and move and shift with in really like critical ways. So that's just something that I would add as well.
Yes. I'm gonna say amen to that. Yeah, so important. And I think, to your point, we as organizers have to be strategic and relentless in creating space for folks to do just that. So we do, in a group I'm a part of, we do this ritual called ashes, and each letter stands for an emotion. And it just lets people like name those emotions, sit with it, but then have community to help them process beyond it to something that's sustainable. Like what was just said, rage is not, that can't be your food day and night, beloved. It'll kill you. And so we have to create those spaces. Moving forward to our next question. So we all know American exceptionalism is one hell of a drug. And it's almost impossible not to get a contact high if you live in these United States of America. And it trains us, it gives us this way of interpreting everything through the lens of progress, inevitable progress. And it's wild because like, it will grab the story of something that points to this empire's genocidal fatal flaws and then frame it as like, oh, this is a blemish that we just overcome and that we just make a tweak and we get better. And it was going to happen because our Constitution is so, from the throne of heaven, right? And in essence, we're taught that these blemishes require the labor, the suffering, and the sacrifice and the blood of Black people to be washed away. In this narrative, Black and Indigenous folks, our freedom struggles are always to create a more perfect union, not to decolonize, not to abolish these systems that create the harm, but just to create a more perfect union. And it's overlooked that our struggles are, in most cases, for us and by us, first and foremost, right? FUBU. And we saw this tendency after the election of Joe Biden. Sorry, I have a bad habit of doing that, so it just comes out. Where everybody was saying Black women saved our democracy. And first of all, we know the US ain't necessarily a democracy. It's a settler colonial empire, right? And it definitely has fragile and highly contested spaces of democratic experimentation. But at the end of the day, this ain't no democracy. Black women weren't necessarily at the front of their thinking trying to save it. Often there are entirely different motives at play with the things that people do. And that compliment in many ways is veiled misogynoir, because Black women are always expected to labor, to suffer, to get it done for the sake of everybody else, and even at the expense of their own well-being. And so this kind of discourse reared its ugly head again shortly after the announcement of the verdict. At that time, we saw from the lips of, at this time, it was from the lips of Nancy Pelosi. And I should have asked beforehand, but do we have that clip to play? Okay, so we're gonna play the clip. I'm gonna come back, drop a question, but I want y'all to listen to what this person said.
We saw it happen, and thank God the jury validated what we saw. So again, thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice, for being there to call out to your mom. How heartbreaking was that? Call out for your mom. I can't breathe. But because of you, and because of thousands, millions of people around the world who came out for justice, your name will always be synonymous with justice. And now we have to make sure justice prevails in the sentencing, but that's its own procedure.
Woo! Had to watch that again. So holla at me, y'all. What are your thoughts on this language um, of sacrifice being applied to the murder of George Floyd. And then what's up underneath that societally? Well, what's up underneath that, even in terms of religious, dominant religious understandings in the US? Who wants to take a jump at that first?
I look. So I don't I don't think I can fully articulate without profuse profanity all of the issues that come up for me um, hearing this clip again and really thinking through what she said and what she was asking us to participate in simultaneously, right? There are many of one persuasion who like to think of the United States as a theocracy, and then there's that group of people who want God and religion as far away from the government as possible, and then there's that group of people who want it all to fall. And there's good reason for that, right? Anthea Butler just released a new book that I encourage everybody to read, White Evangelical Racism. It is a concise, and I mean very concise, history of just that, white evangelical racism, the development of how we now understand how it is the most moral amongst us could find it within themselves to support Donald Trump, not once but twice. As the leader of this government, to read it, because in it she does some clear analysis on the connections between evangelicalism and religion, period, and the development of our current kind of American way, where we find ourselves and the things that we're fighting against at this point. And hearing this, Nancy Pelosi, who is also a devout Catholic, which I find very interesting, a devout practicing Catholic, to the best of my understanding, as a Methodist Protestant, thinking about atonement theologies, the Catholic Church and penal substitutionary atonement don't exactly go together, but they dance. And then you have all of these, us Protestants over here for whom penal substitutionary atonement is biblically based, it's scriptural, and it makes sense for us because everything, again, has to be binary, it has to make sense, right? And so this idea that Jesus paid a penalty for everyone else by dying on the cross is what purchased or the redemption of humankind, right? And that is so complex in so many ways, but it shows up right here in the middle of her comments about a man who was murdered by another human being who took absolutely no account of the fact that he was slowly draining the life out of another human person. So we got this really big kind of spiritual idea around atonement theory and how that interacts with the carceral state and everything like that. Why we think about justice the way that we do, because our religion has taught us that the way that we become saved is through the perpetuation of violence. That the violent death that Jesus endured is the way that you become better. And I mean, I don't know if for anyone else that is a screwed up concept, but for me, it doesn't exactly make sense that someone who is doing the exact opposite of what the empire is doing somehow manages to make your life better by enduring significant violence. That's complex within itself, right? So here we are now, and Nancy Pelosi is talking about he sacrificed his life. He cried out for his mother. We watched a man be murdered for 9.5 minutes. And somehow he sacrificed himself for justice. That he somehow willingly laid some part of who he was down so that a white man could be convicted by a system that can't actually hold him accountable. Those pieces don't go together. But the thing is, church folk everywhere are going to celebrate such an idea because we have such bad theological anthropology, meaning that how we think about God and our bodies together and in relationship is so off, that the idea that somebody could willingly decide in the middle of being murdered, well, I'm going to go ahead and die because other people need me to do this, is actually going to somehow ring true with people. And primarily it will begin to ring true with them because Nancy Pelosi said it. She is somewhat the hope of ages to come because she's just not people on the other side of the aisle. And so people are going to listen to what she said. We're going to be like, yes, that sounds very nice. That's very true. That's how it should be. And it's actually counter to the very ethic of well-being that we're after when we're seeking justice. No one should have to die in order for justice to come. If someone does die, they died doing it because they believe that that's what they had to do, but no one should have to die. And that's not what we're being fed here. We're being fed that justice came because he chose to just go ahead and die, because that's what Jesus did too. It don't work.
I think the other thing that's really important about this is like exceptionalizing, if that's a word, or making exceptional the case of George Floyd, when we know that police murder 3 people a day, every day. And most of those killings never are reported on. We don't know those people's names. And the only reason we know George Floyd's name, because the Minneapolis Police Department immediately put out a statement saying he died during an encounter with an officer due to a medical incident. And that would have been the narrative. So we never would have had this conversation had it not been for 17-year-old Darnella Frazier, who recorded George Floyd's murder. And to hold up George Floyd as if he woke up in the morning and said, I'm gonna go to this corner store and get into this encounter for justice, when we know that police are killing people every day, right? And none of these police are being held to account. I think they said Derek Chauvin is like the 7th police officer that's been found guilty of a charge related to murdering someone since 2005, right? And we know 3 times 352 is a lot, right? So it's thousands of people have been murdered since 2005. In the 24 hours after the Derek Chauvin verdict was read, police murdered 6 people, right? One of them was murdered within minutes, Ma'Khia Bryant. Okay, so creating this narrative as if there's some exceptional sacrifice, and like part of it is like dehumanizing, right? People view it as like a good thing, right? Like he's a sacrifice. Now he's like a saint, right? Like we're exalting him, right? And those logics are dangerously close to the logics of dehumanization, right? That allow people to be caged in the first place. And so I've said this before, like this is part, and Terrence, part of your question was like them talking about Black women saved our democracy. Stacey Abrams is now like a saint, right? Stacey Abrams is not a saint. Stacey Abrams is a person who carried a lot of labor on her back, but she's a human being, right? And creating narratives where she has to become a superhero to save Georgia and to save everybody in the whole United States is the same logic that then would allow us to take someone's life and say they deserved it because they're not human, because look at these animals, which is exactly what they did with Mike Brown. When they let the officer who murdered Mike Brown literally said he didn't look human. He was coming at me. He was so big. He looked like a monster, this and that. And then they let that boy's body lay in the street for 4 hours, right? You would not do that to a dog, right? They would clean a dog hit and run up faster than they would picked up Mike Brown's body. And it's all these same ideas, right, about Black folks not being human. And so I want that to also be in like part of the conversation, that what happened to George Floyd was not exceptional. It really wasn't. They do this every day, right? Because policing is violence, period. And one other thing I want to say quickly is like, part of this is like, police are murdering 3 people a day, right? But police are also brutalizing countless others without taking their lives every day. And that trauma is real as well, right? That trauma has very significant consequences. Just because someone does not end up dead on the other side of a police encounter, Isaiah Brown, the brother in Virginia, who was just shot 10 times because the police mistook his phone, his house phone, for a gun, he wasn't killed, right? But I mean, that's extreme violence. And that just a lot of times those things just go missing from the conversation. And even if you're not shot, if you dragged off the sidewalk, right? If you're pulled over and accosted, that's violence that we have to talk about.
And Brittany, thanks for also mentioning Darnella Frazier, who recorded. I just have to, when I think about this, I think about like the courage it must have taken to record the cops in this situation. I think if you've ever recorded the cops, recorded ICE, right, the level of risk that you then take on. And so if we're thinking about sort of the role of like, especially this particular Black woman, right, this Black teenager, of doing that also meant that she's putting her own self at risk, right? And I'm sure we can think about the sort of feedback that goes from her name being out there as well. I'm sure that some folks have definitely like come after her. And so I just think about that too, of like how many of those folks that, as Brittany mentioned, we're not seeing, right? But luckily, because people have sort of recognized that and stepped up and been courageous, that's something we can do. I also, Kenneth, appreciate everything that you said. I hadn't thought about sort of some of the logic and some of that. And I also want to point out that, which I think most of us on this call, or most of us would probably agree with, that the Democratic Party doesn't have an answer, right? So I think that's like, right? I think that's sort of like overarching for me, is just like, this is who they put up as the spokesperson, right? Yes, Speaker of the House, got it. But y'all couldn't even get talking points that like were at least in line with community, right? And I think that that's a bigger indication of where we're at as a country, as you were mentioning, Terrence, right? Thinking about this as not a democracy, where we're at, that like folks who are in positions of power who dictate our lives are not connected to what is going on the ground, right? And I think that that's just something that happens not just at the federal level, but also at the state level, right? So if you've had to talk to any of our state representatives, I'm going to go ahead and say, unfortunately, a lot of those folks also don't have an understanding of what it means to be sort of talking about abolition, to be talking about sort of why we need to defund the police, right? And so I think that this is unfortunately a bigger sort of problem, which I think most of us probably did not expect anything better, but sometimes it's sort of like, maybe they just shouldn't talk, right? Like they just should not give statements, especially if they're not going to be sort of able to connect with what's actually going on with everything we've been talking about on this Zoom as well.
Right. Facts. So I'll move forward. As we all know, we've already mentioned it earlier in this conversation, that at the very same moment that the system was attempting to wash its hands and save its legitimacy in the eyes of the public, we had in Columbus, Ohio, this tragic killing of Ma'Khia Bryant, a 16-year-old Black girl who had called them for help, who had called the police for help. And if it's always like, I hate to say it, but it is what it is. It's always like trauma on trauma, grief on grief, pain on top of pain. So the trauma, pain, and grief of knowing that happened, thinking about its repercussions for her family, her friends, what that did to traumatize the community. But then like the added trauma of seeing so many folks, even Black and brown kinfolk, declaring that the cop was justified in putting content warning 4 bullets in the chest of a 16-year-old Black girl who had a damn steak knife in her hand. And so for me, obviously, we always talk about the cop in our heads and our hearts has got to be abolished, or I'm gonna say exercised. But these responses also point to the ways that we have internalized other forms of oppression and how we have to reckon with that in community. Obviously, racism, sexism, childism. I could talk 2 hours about childism as a longtime youth worker. And then lastly, I think something tangled up in this is fat phobia. The fact that she was a fat Black girl gave folks a certain kind of lens that her body was a weapon in that moment, beyond the fact she had a steak knife. And so I want y'all to just jump in and just, you know, from the heart, just share what you think we need to be confronting as it relates to this tragic moment from, you know, the idea of a justified police shooting and then some of these other internalized forms of oppression that we've got to reckon with.
I think for me, like, these problematic and tragic narratives and responses to the death of Ma'Khia Bryant kind of go back to that last point that we were talking about when we were talking about notions of sacrifice. To be a marginalized person in this country, and in particular, to be a Black girl in this world, is to constantly be put on a pedestal as a living sacrifice, constantly, to sustain other people's lives, right? And so even before any of this happened to her, people already look at Black girls and assume that they should be willing and ready to sacrifice themselves at any moment possible. And for a lot of folks, it does not matter whose hands Black girls die from, but it is assumed that they are willing and living sacrifices to be offered to assuage the system constantly. So that's like one point that I'll make. And another point that I'll make is that a lot of folks cannot imagine and do not know a world in which de-escalation, like actual real de-escalation, is a thing, right? For a lot of folks, and it goes back to that carceral logic, it goes back to that punishment logic. If something is happening that we do not like, we just kill it. And if you're existing in a body, just existing and breathing in a body, let alone holding a steak knife, compared to the many guns that they had in that space, you've already become a target. And so it is disheartening and infuriating to hear people disrespect life like that, because folks don't know how to preserve life. Folks don't know actual de-escalation strategies. And not only do folks not know it, but folks just don't choose it. Because this de-escalation would go against the sacrifice model that we have put onto marginalized people's bodies. So that is what I'll say about that before I go into tears, because this brings up tears, because this is a grieving moment constantly.
I want to just point to this last point that Major was just making, right? Like, folks, the police do know how to de-escalate, because they de-escalate white men all the time. They de-escalate white men that are running them over with cars, that have axes, hammers, pistols, rifles, any type of weapon you want to name, they de-escalate that all the time. And these white men be getting, oh, here, you want a water bottle? Here, let me feed you some water. Here, did you get a cut on your arm? Let me wipe your arm off. And we see them when it's Black kids pulling up within 20 seconds. I think, how long were they on the scene when they shot Tamir Rice? 22 seconds?
I think it was less than that.
Less than that.
Yeah.
Right? Pull up shooting. This man that shot Ma'Khia Bryant was a trained military marksman. A trained military marksman. He shot her to kill her. That was his intention, to kill her. It was not to do anything else in that moment. It was not to protect anybody else. He shot her to kill her in that moment. And let's not forget, because after that moment, there's video where the police then respond to the crowd saying Blue Lives Matter.
Sure did.
So this was not a, oh my God, we didn't have no choice. You know what I'm saying? We had to, because we were trying to protect everybody. No. These are choices, decisions that were made. And our ability, I mean, I really want y'all, everybody, when y'all get off this, Google Kimberly Crenshaw, The Urgency of Intersectionality TED Talk. And I need y'all to watch that in full. It's 18 minutes. I need y'all to watch it in full. And let me tell you why, because she's explaining what intersectionality is, which as a sidebar is important because many of us are misusing it. That's number one. But number two, what she's doing is allowing us to see the unequal frames that are used when Black men and boys are killed versus when Black women and girls are killed. And that's a problem because we immediately went from high celebration about the murderer of George Floyd being held to account to immediately, not the next day. You understand what I'm saying? I'm talking about immediately shifted. Black people, sisters, immediately shifted to making justifications about why Ma'Khia deserved to be shot, to be murdered. Okay, not shot to be stopped, shot to be dead. And me having to look at Black women making those arguments, I'm like, man, misogyny, whew, man, this is a kid right here.
Yeah. I had to sit in silence for a while after first hearing about it. I'm a member of a number of digital spaces, and one of those is a digital religious space that was holding space for us to process the verdict because there was still a lot of anxiety and angst and things going on about that. And one of the persons leading that space actually is in Columbus, Ohio, and teaches people related to Ma'Khia Bryant. So we were experiencing and living in that moment with her, recognizing that the kids she taught were texting her and saying, you know, Miss, thank you for everything you've ever done for me. I appreciate you. When she can describe the day before they had just cussed her out. It was because they were in such a space where they were going to go and try to handle this themselves. We were sitting and trying to process a verdict that was just like, what? And then a 16-year-old girl is shot 4 times by an officer for no clear reason, like none. And trying to sit with that, carry that, it was a reality. The varied kinds of privileges that I carry as a Black man, particularly in Black spaces, but just having some little tiny bit of male privilege in other spaces, right? I was just like, I'm at a point where I don't even know how to process this in such a way to communicate, particularly men, like, y'all are missing this on so many levels, because you're like, the officer was right to kill her. No, like I could not even begin to process words to articulate to them um, how backwards that perspective was. And I cried that night because I was so frustrated by the fact that Black men will turn on Black women so quickly. Um, and I mean, and I'm perpetually frustrated by that fact, but I was just particularly frustrated by that fact that night, that Black men will turn on Black women so quickly. um and it leaves no space for anything. It's difficult to grieve when your own won't even look at you as a human being. You are a commodity even to them. um and and I think about it, and I'm like, there are a myriad of ways that we could think to address that, or to, or to talk about it. But one of the primary things that's really been sitting with me when thinking about this issue is embodiment, that we have no sense of true fullness within ourselves, that we have a disconnection with our bodies. Um, in such a way that even whatever little bit of grief you may feel about the fact that a 16-year-old Black girl got shot cannot translate itself fully even to your body for you to really feel or empathize with what Black women have long been feeling, right? And so that kind of disconnected issue with our bodies, and then issue embodiment when it comes to the legacy of slavery, and all of these different pieces that pour into that. We're looking at a situation where we can't like, we can't even, we're having difficulty doing right by one another because we don't respect each other's bodies enough to see the humanity in the living flesh, not just in the living idea. And I think part of what we have to talk about, and I think even abolitionist spaces push us to think about, is that we are dealing with real flesh, not just ideas. And we have to sit with that, and we have to feel the weight of that, because it hasn't stopped. It's been going on, and again, police kill 3 people a day. Like, we have a lot that we have to fight and contend with, so much so that we have to begin feeling the good of our flesh. That, like Baby Sugg says in Beloved, you have to love your flesh, because yonder there, they don't love it. They hate it. And so if we can't love it together, it's what really helps to spawn some of the reactions and things that we've heard.
Terrence, honestly, I would love to hear you speak to some of this de-escalation stuff, because the work of de-escalation happens. People are de-escalating these types of incidents all the time without pistols.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna mention something quickly. So I've been doing youth work, 17 years. I can't remember what year that would be, but 17 years now. And a lot of that has been with gang adjacent, gang affiliated youth. And just in the course of, like, puberty and all the things that you go through as a young person, if you have everything necessary for flourishing at your fingertips, then you add on top of that various forms of oppression. Clearly, there are going to be things that arise when you're doing youth work. And so I could go situation after situation after situation to full groups of guys with guns ready to throw down, being able to de-escalate that, to what was a similar situation, but was with grown men on Patterson Avenue, right outside of Hot Dog City, 2018 or so. I'm driving down the street and I see two dudes fighting. And again, abolition is not a theory to me, it's a practice. And in some ways, I guess I was already inside of it before I called it that, because I never like calling the police. I feel like we can handle our own ish most of the time, even back then before I came to abolition. But anyways, I pulled over and these men were fighting. By the time I got close enough, one of the brothers had backed up and he pulled out a blade. And he was in attack mode, and me and two other guys put ourselves in between them and de-escalated the whole thing. We took the knife from him. One of them walked with the brother like 3 blocks away to cool him down. The others of us talked to the other brother. And before you know it, there was no beef. It was squashed. And guess what? There was no retaliation after the fact. Like both of the men, after you really got down to it, it was a dumb argument. And I would just imagine that there was stress and all kind of other things leading towards something small turning into something big. So all that to say, I have some training in de-escalation. I'll full disclosure. However, a lot of it is just from experience, like being in a space where stuff pops off and it's like, what are we gonna do? And when you love folks and you care about folks and you realize that the other option could literally lead someone to a fate like Ma'Khia Bryant, you begin to figure out what else can be done. And so I do not buy for a second that this was the only option. I don't respect protocol in a settler colonial empire. Let's delegitimize the whole thing, period. But beyond that, like literally regular Negroes at Hot Dog City. I was going in there to get me a Bang, this energy drink, and a Snickers bar. I was on the way to do a talk down at the innovation quarters. Freudian slip. I wasn't sitting in a car like in the mode of peacemaking, but we were able to diffuse that situation. So that's one of the beautiful possibilities of abolitionist work is being done. And I think we need to begin all the more to teach our people, everyday people, give them the tool belts to begin to intervene where they have capacity. I'm not suggesting that every single person need to be doing what I be doing, because some of the stuff I say to myself, you got to make better decisions with your life, Terrence. Like, this was ridiculous. But again, we have tools and possibilities beyond calling the cops. And this is just another horrific reminder of that and the urgency of now, the fierce urgency of now for abolitionist practice. So we at 6:06. I need somebody to tell me, I know normally, this is my first time hosting y'all, so I'm a rookie. I told Britt, like, yo, you the GOAT at this. Why you got me doing this? So I don't know if we just keep going and get through all the questions or, okay, I got the thumbs up. We gonna keep it pushing. So moving to this next question, and specifically, I'd like to hear Mage and Felicia respond to this. But I could be wrong, and y'all can push back in your answer. But it seems like we've begun to turn the corner and get people to understand how unhelpful, how traumatizing it is to share video loops on social media of Black folks being slain in the name of raising awareness. And, you know, I think we're turning the corner on that. Unfortunately, the lack of available video for some, you know, racist incident of state violence hasn't stopped some folks from doing problematic things with the images and names of folks who've been murdered by the police. Most recently, Samaria Rice, and I won't get down in the weeds of this, but she basically accused some folks who are highly visible of being ambulance chasers and clout chasers, who basically co-opt the names of people who've been murdered for their own personal gain. This ain't a new phenomenon. There's a whole tradition of that. And we've got to contend with it in our generation. But, you know, with Breonna Taylor, you know, all kind of foolishness was done in the name of raising awareness. And now with Micaiah Bryant, Mays, you mentioned in our recent meeting that you thought there might be some openings, some possibilities for a healing-centered approach, that's my language, to these incidents, because people are sharing Micaiah's TikTok videos where she's just a young, carefree, Black girl getting her edges together, right? And just how that could open up something for us in terms of doing these things, responding in ways that embed healing. And then, so what are y'all seeing in that regards? And then connected to that, because y'all talk to us about how healing work is indispensable in our liberation projects. So sort of a twofold question. Hopefully some of that stuck, but whoever wants to jump in first, but I did want to call y'all two out first.
Yeah, for me, I think healing-centered approaches, healing justice in general is so essential to liberation work, because if we are not healing, it is inevitable that we are going to just perpetuate and recycle the traumas that we have been ingesting for generations over and over and over again. That generational trauma exists in families, it exists in communities, it exists in nations, it exists, period. Like generational trauma is a thing, and it does impact people in really real and tangible ways. And memory, like the ways in which we hold memory in our bodies, in our minds, in our spirits, has really significant impact on human life in general, right? And so in regards to like whether or not we turned a corner, I'm unsure. I do think that people are not sharing as much like murder footage as they used to, right? Because that was trauma porn before. I do think that people are not sharing as much murder footage, but I do think that folks are taking a different approach to causing violence, right? Whether that be creating like $100 necklaces named after different Black folk who've been transitioned, right? Like, and that happened in like Charleston, South Carolina, like from the ways in which people put Black people's faces in these really memorialized kind of ways on Time magazine and covers and things like that. I think it's just a different way, because they found out like, oh, we can't share that trauma porn no more, even though we enjoy it, really, because some folks do enjoy it, right? To watch it over and over and over again, they enjoy it. And they'd have just gone to more respectable looking approaches to perpetuating those images, right? And so I think part of healing justice work is being really critically thinking about how we memorialize and remember people without commodifying them, right? And so to use Micaiah Bryant's own video footage of her documenting her life in the ways in which she wanted to be remembered, because she put those videos on TikTok of herself, I think is a healing-centered, healing justice approach to understanding and remembering her life without commodifying her, right? Because memory is important, and we should not forget how she died, right? We should never forget how she died, but we should always be remembering how she lived her life. And if that means TikTok videos of her laying her edges, then so be it, because that is how she wanted to be remembered. And given the social media age now, we have a lot of possibilities on how we remember folks, because folks are posting their pictures. They're posting their cutest selfies that they could ever use. That selfie. Don't use those images, and also be very critical about how you share those images too. Because while some of us might appreciate those images, some of us really cannot be trusted to hold those images with integrity, because those folks cannot even be held responsible and trustworthy of holding bodies with integrity either. So that's what I have to say on that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think the thing that when you brought this up first, Maj, I was thinking about was just the sort of intersection of like the narratives that get created and sort of the need for that memorialized image or sort of story, and sort of how that also very much is tied to the healing of the family, right? And sort of how that is really what I think, if we are sharing, like thinking about the intent of how is this impacting the folks who are holding the trauma, I think, right? And I'm thinking more about like the family trauma in this particular situation. Obviously, like collective trauma, I think, is also occurring. But I think there's another example too that I was just thinking of is when you mentioned the being able to share the videos that are created by those folks, right? I think about I also, like, in my sort of study and research, focus on jail deaths across North Carolina, and sort of that aspect in just obviously one that this crew has definitely tackled and worked on before to bring to light. But I also think about, like, in the newspapers, right, how are the pictures that are coming from the state agencies, what are they reflecting of those community members? And so I think of this one case of a young man down in Johnston County named Eric Cruz, who, when I first saw it in the newspaper, I was sort of shocked by the picture that was chosen, because I actually don't know where they got the picture from, but was also meant to dehumanize him, right? To sort of, again, come back to this narrative and the criminalization, right? That this person, or the sort of logic that is, quote unquote, this person deserved to die because they were incarcerated, right? Like, that this was something that they had done something wrong. And I think that the family at least had put together a GoFundMe with a picture of this person smiling, this person having a good time. And I think that that's the sort of intersection that we need to think about, right? Is how would the family actually want this person to be remembered? And I think that that's what we miss often, is that healing process is going to take a long time. There's this past weekend, a sort of statewide virtual convening of missing and murdered Indigenous women in the state and in the country. And so just thinking about, right, that being able to combine, I think, the storytelling component, right, and being able to sort of hear these individuals' own words and sort of their life is something that is, I hope we are making that turn, right, to make sure that we understand exactly what you said, that these folks did lead full lives, right, or did and had sort of joyous experiences, and how do we sort of bring that to the forefront while we recognize that the system is going to continue to do this, and while we push for people to continue just to be alive.
I want to say one quick thing too, what Felicia just said, like part of what we have to hold is that people do live full lives. And that means sometimes people have done things that are not great things, and those people don't deserve to be murdered either, right? People don't have to be an honor student. People don't have to be president of their student council. People don't have to be, employee of the month or whatever else. No, people don't deserve to be murdered. And part of what happens sometimes is like this rush to create a narrative that this was like the best person. And we know when we create narratives that, oh, they were innocent, so they didn't deserve to die. Guilty people don't deserve to die either, right? Guilt, I say guilty like this because criminalization is a whole different thing. But like people that have done things that were not supposed to be done, right, don't deserve to be murdered. And so I want us also to be careful about like feeling such a rush, like, oh, we have to like paint this whole, like we have to say every great thing Micaiah did. Well, Micaiah also was fighting, and regardless, she didn't deserve to be murdered in front of her house, right? Like I said, like, can we hold space for Black kids to fight, to cuss, to have an attitude, right? To call somebody, to say something loud to somebody, right? To wear big hoops, right? To be in the full range of whatever they want to be, whatever may happen, whatever emotion, whatever action they may have. Black kids, Black adults, all of us, right? Can we be people too, right? Like not have to be this caricature of perfection every single fucking day of our lives. Excuse me, but this is how it feels. If I am not perfect every single day, then somebody may justify. If somebody goes into my past and finds out, oh, I got arrested, I've smoked weed, I've been in a fight, they will literally, right? No, these people don't deserve to die either, right? And so we have to be careful too in the way, even like people who understand, right, abolitionists, people who don't feed into the carceral state, this rush to create these like saint narratives.
No doubt, no doubt. And it's just, one thing that's so frustrating about it is how classed it is. It's gendered, it's classed, but that class, that intersection with class and racialization, if you're Black, brown, and poor at the same time, don't mess around and be Black, brown, poor, and a girl, or Black, brown, poor, a girl, and queer at the same time. Like, don't mess around and have all of that, as a part of who you are. But the way we are patient, forgiving, trusting, kind, and seeing the best in these imperialists, but we can't do that for working class, poor, Black and brown folks. It just shows you how we live in a nation that glorifies and worships the powerful and rich. And when you glorify and worship the powerful and rich, who do you have to demonize? Who do you have to browbeat? Those who are not. And I think that's so often what's going on in that. Some folk hate them some Black and brown, poor, working class people. And that's a problem that we've got to address, we've got to deal with, and we've got to be sensitive to all that you all have laid out so eloquently. I guess I'm gonna move on to this last question. Let me pull it up right quick. Okay, so this past, was it Monday or Tuesday that the city council meets? Monday, I should know that. This past Monday, the city council gave an official apology for the long legacy of racist oppression in our city. So they named things like urban renewal, which was basically, bulldozing Black neighborhoods, and other instances of oppression here in our city. And they also expressed or officially gave their support, quotation marks, for research, emphasis on research, put like 3 asterisks in front of research, for research, not implementation, for research of what reparations might look like. Besides the fact that, in my view, apologies minus the substance of repair are hollow, the whole thing sort of reeked of like, neoliberal performance. It was basically, saying we sorry while also punting the football of responsibility literally to the state and the federal level, as if there's nothing that can be done by those who oversee budgets and so many other things in the city of Winston-Salem. Somehow they got $2.3 billion to make downtown pop again, but they can't figure that kind of investment out for other parts of town. So I guess my question is, can y'all help us think about reparations from an abolitionist perspective, and then how this apology connects to FC Park's demands? So there are demands that are connected to actual budgets that could and should be implemented. But there was an apology offered versus like, oh, you know what? We're going to listen to what these organizers and activists keep showing up and saying. We're going to not just listen. We're not going to just give them lip service. We're going to actually do it. So whoever wants to jump in first and connect those dots, by all means.
Honestly, Terrence, I would love to hear you connect these dots, because you have such a the way that you have explained reparations on different occasions has been powerful. And I think you have a direct connection to abolition that I think is important for us to think about. And if I said anything, I would just be pulling from anything I remember you saying about it, to be honest.
So you punting the football of responsibility to me. I'm messing with you. I'm messing with you. Lord, well, hopefully, let's see. There's a long tradition of Black folks from post-emancipation to the present advocating and organizing around reparations. From the 40 acres and a mule, era. Then there's like a intermediary era where people like Queen Mother Moore, powerful radical Black woman who, waved the reparations banner. But she wasn't, I'm glad I named her because she had a radical politics that saw capitalism as a problem, saw patriarchy as a problem, and saw all these things as in need of dismantling. And, most recently, I think the group that I point to as waving that radical banner of reparations is NCOBRA. There are other groups, I'm not even gonna name them, but maybe I should name them. ADOS is one group. Groups like ADOS, though they make some good claims, they lean towards the conservative side because the assumption is if they cut us a check, all will be well, right? And I'm not anti a check, cut the check, right? But reparations, as it's been contended for centuries, is not just about a check. And Cobra lays out these 5 blocks of reparations, one of which is like land. Obviously, we always have to be sensitive to the fact we're on indigenous people's land. And so that's a whole nother conversation that has to be worked out. And we don't want land back that wasn't ours to begin with, right? Land that we were called to work on that was stolen in the first place. So we always have to be sensitive to that. But one piece of reparations that NCOBRA calls for is this idea of cessation. They don't use the language of abolition, but they literally state reparations is ending the daggum systems that caused the harm in the first place. So it's the halt of those harmful systems so that folks can live, breathe, and flourish. And so I think from a local perspective, the demands from this coalition, from groups like Hate Out of Winston-Salem, are in alignment with that. It's not the full spectrum of reparations, but to say, yes, we apologize for this history of disinvestment. And we also realize that history of disinvestment is what engenders criminalized activity in a lot of these communities. It's not because Black folk and brown folk just have some, ingrown trait that makes them, want to get out on the block and hustle or rob each other, kill each other, we are inside of a structure, inside of social dynamics that put pressure on people to make decisions that make sense inside of the context, but decisions nevertheless that are dangerous, harmful, and ultimately end us up dead in a cage or in just horrible cycles. So if the city council, from my view, I land the plane here, was serious about that apology, it would come along with some redistribution of some of these funds. Why don't we take a few million and put it towards community controlled programs that do violence interruption and peacemaking work? Why wouldn't we demilitarize the police force? Why wouldn't we do these things? Because these things are the afterlife of everything y'all apologizing for. So you're gonna leave the afterlife, the ghost around? You're not gonna get rid of the ghost with your apology? To me, that's just hollow. And again, we'll go on and see what the end gonna be, and we're gonna have to put pressure on them. But at the end of the day, at this point, I'm like, nah, y'all can keep the apologies. Y'all been apologizing for stuff in this nation for a long time. What y'all haven't been doing, if I could be theological for a second, y'all ain't been repenting. Y'all haven't been engaging in acts of repentance, concrete acts of repentance, which includes redistribution. Somebody else jump in on that.
It's the lack of consistency for me, okay? For you to be like, when we're doing in local elections, and for you to be like, if you really want change to happen in your community, you would elect me to be in this city council seat. And then when shit pops off, you're gonna be like, well, the responsibility is actually on the state and federal level. It's like, why did we vote? what was the reason, right? So it's the lack of consistency for me. And then also on the topic of reparations includes actual accountability. And it's not just this one and done type of thing. It's a journey, to not to be cliche, but it's a journey, not a destination, right? And so, you don't, it's not even just like redistributing police budgets for 1 year. It's a constant redistribution of wealth over time, because that is what the police, we talk about rich and wealthy, the police are wealthy, right? That is decades and decades and decades of intergenerational wealth being passed on amongst institutions to make sure that institutions, their little babies and beyond, can stay in the positions of power that they are in, right? And so that is part of it's a constant process of redistribution. It's this constant process of accountability. It doesn't just end with one verdict, right? It is a constant understanding that, honestly, nothing that you're gonna pay me will ever be enough for the harm that you have put me through, for the harm that you've put my ancestors through, for the harm that you've put my kid. Nothing, there's no price tag to that in actuality. So if there's no price tag, then we have to transform the ways in which we exist in community with each other. Yeah. Money is just one aspect, because capitalism is not going to save us either, right? For now, that's what we're living with, because a check pays rent, but capitalism is not going to save us. So for it to only stay within the money realm is not the solution we need.
Yeah, I think that that's often the tension, right? Is when we're talking about this, and Mariam Kaba just had a piece in The Intercept that talks about the money that the government is using is public money. It's our money. We're to do with it what we want for ourselves, for the well-being of our communities and our family and the world, right? And that's one aspect of this discussion, as you just mentioned, Midge. I think the other thing too is thinking about, like, can we, and obviously not me, can, when the reparations come, right, that I assume will be going hopefully to Black folks, right, and folks whose land has been stolen, that when we're talking about those alternatives, right, I think that those alternatives have to exist outside of the institutions, right? So one of our NC-SPAN is in a bigger sort of collective called the North Carolina Black Leadership and Organizing Collective, and one of our networks is the Building Alternatives Networks, where specifically thinking about, and we have this sort of through line with taking police budgets and thinking about it specifically to invest in Black-led alternatives to the institutions that we've had to live under. And so I think in that realm, the divestment isn't just from the police, the divestment is from the capitalist state, right, that we've had to sort of live under in these conditions too. So I do think that, like, that's where the sort of, right, the police budgets are, like, I think one of the biggest sort of harm institutions, right, or harmful institutions. Obviously, as Terrence mentioned earlier, what did you call it, gentrification station, or if I just butchered the name, right? Obviously, we know too that gentrifiers in that sort of disposition of home ownership is also, right, the other way that we're seeing the disinvestment from Black communities in particular too, especially in cities like Winston-Salem or Raleigh, Charlotte, where we know that traditionally there's been longstanding Black communities who are having their ability to own homes in those areas taken away as well.
I will throw a comment that is very very sector specific for myself, obviously. There are like several complexes that have to be broken down: the nonprofit industrial complex, the military industrial complex, and here's my favorite one, the Christo-fascist political political carceral complex. Like, all that shit gotta go. And I name it in this way because we don't like to talk about, just in most just general spaces, we don't like to talk about the United States as empire, right? And so for a lot of well-meaning folks, whatever that ends up meaning nowadays, right? They will hear this announcement. Some folks are gonna be like, really, really, really? Everybody's under pressure to do this. Da, 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 da. But then there's gonna be this other group of folks who are like, oh my God, this is great. And a lot of them are gonna be compelled to support it and to feel it's great because they feel like, for example, that it's their Christian duty. But part of the challenge of that is that for a long time, Christianity has been the tool of the empire, right? And so the very Jesus that your average progressive is going to claim that makes this a good idea is the tamed Jesus of empire that has not ever met the actual Jesus the comrade instead of Jesus the king. And so what a lot of resistance to this is going, well, a lot of resistance will end up coming of this when they start hearing the idea that some people don't think this is enough or it doesn't actually do anything, right? And so we have to begin to continue having the conversations and doing the work that breaks down these complexes that make us feel comfortable with the idea that an apology and then a punt is actually progress. And again, I'm saying this, people are going to feel like this is fantastic because this is exactly what Jesus would do. No, this is not what Jesus would do. This is not what Jesus would do, right? And I can only speak from that religious perspective, but the reason I bring this up is because it is ingrained, especially in this city, but in the minds and in the bodies of people everywhere where this conversation is being had. And we have to think about the fact, just as Terrence mentioned repentance as the action that is not happening, part of repentance is also demolition. That what we have to do is that radical repentance doesn't simply mean that you turn away from the practices. Radical repentance means that once you turned away, your turning away also helps to destroy. And that we have to employ radical repentance as a way of possibly even attempting to right centuries of wrong, right? And so, yeah, the conversations about reparations is always going to be an emotional one. But for a lot of people, this is actually also going to be a spiritual conversation as well. And that's where a lot of the complexity is going to come in because a lot of people have never actually attached their salvation to their liberation. And we have to start making that connection for folks who might not be in abolitionist space, but are trying to figure out how to do more and to do it well. And that this does align with your faith. You just have to see it that way. And so that's going to be part of the conversation as well, I believe.
No doubt. I appreciate that. We in the Bible Belt, y'all. We in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. How my man said on what was the movie where the character was from Winston-Salem? Brothers.
Oh, brother, where art thou?
No. Never mind. I'll go off on a tangent. Never mind. I'll put it in the comments later so y'all can go watch it. But there's a character in a story, way old flick about South Central LA, and the character moved to South Central LA from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, of all places. And the way he said it just had us looking so dusty over here. But it is what it is. Yeah, I appreciate that. So those are all of our questions. I don't know if any burning questions presented themselves in the comment section, but at this point, I'm gonna pass it to Brittany to make an announcement about an upcoming move, demonstration, gathering, and we'll take it from there.
So two quick announcements. One, we've talked a lot about what hasn't been done. So some of y'all are like, okay, well, what needs to be done and how can I contribute? Very simply, you can go on Triad Abolition Project website, triadabolitionproject.org. We have posted every comment that we've given during the public comment period at city council meetings and every comment that we've made at county commissioner meetings since August. 2020. There's been over 30 comments to city council. You can literally copy and paste text from those comments and email your city council person around whatever things speak to you, around reallocation, around violence interrupters programs, around mental health crisis intervention unit that is not police related, any of those things. Poor language, you can have it, use it, call, make your own public comment at city council. It's budget cycle time. It's very important that the people's voices be heard when it's budget cycle time, because this is what is how money is going to be spent for the following year. The second thing is, part of the intent for this conversation was to have a dialogue about healing. And we know that dialogue needs to continue because we're constantly being inundated with trauma. And so Triad Abolition Project tries to do some of that work. Drum Majors does that work, right? And so Triad Abolition Project is going to have a march and a vigil. The theme being, we need a time to grieve. And that's April 30th. We're going to start with a community dinner at 6:30, and then we're going to do a march and do a vigil to hold space for our collective grief around all of the people who have been murdered by the state. So come join us for that. We're going to start at 201 North Chestnut Street in Winston-Salem, have dinner. And you can, I'm sure somebody's dropping in the chat the information, more information about that. That's on our Facebook page. Felicia, did you have any announcements before we close?
I don't think I have any immediate announcements. I just wanted to say that there will probably be some renewed discussion in North Carolina about body cam footage and access to that, given recent events. And so I think just be on the lookout. I think we'll probably post something on our page and may request other partners post something right now. Hopefully folks know out there in Facebook world, but typically to get any access from law enforcement body cams or dash cams, you have to go through a judge to get some of that. And the sort of call out in Elizabeth City right now is for that information to be showed to the family right now. So we will see sort of what happens with that, but there's also some pushes at the state legislature to reverse some of that, because it adds another barrier to folks accessing that footage when it might be pretty necessary for folks to know what happened to their loved ones in officer involved shootings and murders. And then I just also dropped in the chat, there's one of our other networks in Block is Sanctuary in the City, and they provide healing spaces and different sort of virtual events on an ongoing basis if anyone would like to join those as well.
Thank you. Thank you. So we are going to close this thing out. Once again, we thank everyone for tuning in. If you're catching it on the replay, lean in, share it with someone after you get done watching. And I guess we'll close, as I like to so often, with the words of Fred Hampton. We say, peace to you if you're willing to fight for it. Peace to you if you're willing to fight for it. All right, y'all. Peace.